Today, for the first time in American history, federal workers took the day off to honor Juneteenth.
Juneteenth represents not only the commemoration of the end of slavery in America more than 150 years ago, but the ongoing work to have to bring true equity and racial justice into American society.
Equity. Juneteenth is designed to commemorate the end of slavery, a 12th federal holiday made official by the Biden administration yesterday, passed with a 415-14 vote in the House and unanimous consent in the Senate. Strong support, of course, because who's going to vote against something like this? Congress supports it because it's the politically correct thing to do, regardless of how it divides our society. But before this year, had you ever heard of Juneteenth? Most TV networks put on explainers for their audiences. Newspapers did too. Had you ever heard of the Tulsa Massacre, a very dark event in our history, an atrocity from 100 years ago in Oklahoma? Something as a nation we should move on from, but under the Biden administration, it takes center stage as they attempt to burden this country with enough white guilt to poison our culture. The media is doing its part as well. Tulsa Massacre documentaries are everywhere you look right now. Juneteenth commemorates the date June 19, 1865, when a Union general arrived in Galveston, Texas to proclaim freedom for the slaves 3 years after Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The official name of this new holiday is Juneteenth National Independence Day, a rushed piece of legislation and clearly a holiday with a political agenda. Michael Knowles at the Daily Wire makes an excellent point on this. It commemorates no concrete act or particular man, but rather an overdue, inconclusive episode on the never-ending march toward progress. So let's have a real conversation about slavery. Certainly one of the worst crimes against humanity possible, an embarrassment to our country, of course. But from the rhetoric right now, one would think the only slavery that's ever occurred in the history of mankind was white Americans enslaving Africans a few hundred years ago. But slavery has been a worldwide practice for thousands of years, and you might be surprised to learn slavery still exists today on a pretty big scale. It exists inside Africa. Africans enslaving other Africans at an alarming rate. Here's some information from the Global Slavery Index. On any given day, as recently as 2016, an estimated 9.2 million men, women, and children were living in modern slavery in Africa. The region has the highest rate of prevalence. 7.6 out of every 1,000 people are living in modern slavery in Africa. The rate of forced marriage at 4.8 per thousand was higher than the rate of forced labor at 2.8 per thousand, they say. More than half of all victims of forced labor exploitation were held in what's called debt bondage, with similar proportions of men and women in the region, Africa, trapped through debt. 400,000 people victims of forced sexual exploitation, another type of slavery, accounting for 8% of all victims worldwide. Slavery, today, a 10-hour flight away. Did you have any idea? Of course not. It doesn't get much attention because there's no political gain to it. Let's just focus on how awful America is, right? That's the goal. The country that ended its own slavery 150 years ago, by the way. More than 150 years ago. Clearly, the woke mob is running the White House. We all see that. This is really about federalizing the 1619 Project, making slavery and victimhood the centerpiece of this country.
This national holiday will serve a powerful reminder that we cannot run from our past.
It's also a recognition that we have so much work to do to rid this country of systemic racism, discrimination, and hate.
Hilariously enough, Joe Biden has been an integral part of all this. How many racist comments and actions has this man displayed over 47 years in Washington? Here he is.
Juneteenth marks both the long, hard night of slavery and subjugation and a promise of a brighter morning to come. This is a day of profound, in my view, profound weight and profound power. A day in which we remember the moral stain, the terrible toll that slavery took on the country.
That from the man who didn't want his kids growing up in a racial jungle, fought against school integration and busing. He read the eulogy for a KKK member, Senator Robert Byrd, another Democrat, an exalted cyclops with the Ku Klux Klan. I can only hope that everybody that gathered around him for this signing yesterday realized how stupid it all looked. It's all politics. Never, ever forget that. It's all about power. The 1619 Project pushes a narrative that this country was founded to preserve the institution of slavery itself, and that everything grew from that and the entire system is racist to this very day. A story embraced by the left because it surrounds the black community in victimhood and requires us to dismantle capitalism to fix it. It's a Marxist pipe dream. It is little more than that. It has nothing to do with race, really. It's about politics, just like BLM. Only one member of Congress actually put out a statement opposing this bill before the vote happened yesterday, and that was Congressman Matt Rosendale of Montana, who said, "Let's call an ace an ace." This is an effort by the left to create a day out of whole cloth to celebrate identity politics as part of its larger efforts to make critical race theory the reigning ideology of our country. As a man with guts, we're going to be talking to that gentleman here in just a minute. The GOP, though, other than him, barely put up a fight against this, of course. Again, who's going to fight against this? Everybody's mortified of this subject. Welcome to your Republican Party without Donald Trump. And there are real ramifications to this. In the rush to push this thing through, with minimal debate, of course, Congressman James Comer pointed this out.
We have not had ample time to consider the effects of granting the entire federal workforce another day off work. And we do not know what effect, if any, this bill will have on federal programs and missions that our government delivers to the American taxpayer each day.
Country has 2 million federal workers. According to Senator Ron Johnson, an additional holiday for these 2 million people amounts to about $600 million every single year. And that's your money. Johnson said it still seems strange that having taxpayers provide federal employees paid time off is now required to celebrate the end of slavery. It's a pretty good scheme. If you think about it, though, the Democrats cleaned up on this deal. More hate for the country, more anger and unrest, more division, more victimhood, and more entitlement with another free day off. It is modern liberalism at its very best. Joining me now to talk about this is Congressman Matt Rosendale of the state of Montana. And sir, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on with you tonight, Rob. I really appreciate it.
So, and of course, yeah, and you're probably the most outspoken person in Congress in your opposition to making this a federal holiday. It's very brave. Tell us why you did it.
Because it's the right thing to do, Rob. There's too many people that before they cast a vote, they wring their hands and they fret over it, and they know it's right, and they know that things are more political than they are actual, and yet they just are intimidated for casting the proper vote. That's not why the people of Montana sent me up to Washington, D.C. They want me to fight to protect our lifestyle. They want us to protect their constitutional rights and their freedoms, and that's what I'm there for. And this does not do that. This doesn't accomplish anything. If you look at the proper name of the legislation, is Juneteenth, National Independence Day. And as you stated very clearly, this is nothing more than an attempt to replace the 4th of July as our Independence Day. We all celebrate the 4th of July of when our country established our independence from the crown and the Declaration of Independence was signed. And this is just another way that we can mix that up. And it is also to pursue and advance the critical race theory. I quite frankly think that the left is starting to get such a pushback from the different school districts and school systems and even attorney generals around the nation that are pushing back on this critical race theory and how it is unconstitutional, illegal to even enforce it,
right,
that they're trying to find another method which they can control the population and, quite frankly, unfortunately, try to cause divisiveness amongst the people of our nation.
What do you say? I mean, a Democrat is going to straight up say you're a racist. They're going to say talking about this is racist. Everything's racist.
Oh, sure.
How do you respond to that?
Again, this is just nothing more than their intimidation practices that they've been using for many years now to try and silence the actual truth of what's going on. Oh, we heard statement after statement on the House floor that this was just simply another step towards trying to eliminate the systemic racism that exists in our country today. I just don't buy into that. I refuse to accept that premise. I think we have a very good country, that the vast majority of the people across this country are extremely good. They want to work with everyone. And I do believe that they judge folks by the content of their character and not the color of their skin.
Right.
And I think that if we would embrace that and work on it more, instead of trying to create an issue to divide us, we would be much better off.
Here's Kamala Harris's remarks from the bill signing. Let's take a listen.
As we commemorate the history of Juneteenth, as we did just weeks ago with the history of the Tulsa race massacre, we must learn from our history, and we must teach our children our history, because it is part of our history as a nation. It is part of American history.
Your response to that?
It is part of our history, and the emancipation is part of our history. I wish more Democrats would recognize that that charge was led by the Republican Abraham Lincoln, who we celebrate with dinners for many decades now in our Lincoln-Reagan dinners, not the Democratic Party, who has been the party of divisiveness and oppression, quite frankly. And I don't understand why they want to try to create this separate celebration that's going to come in direct conflict with the 4th of July, again, by calling it Independence Day instead of calling it what it is, and that's the emancipation, which we certainly should celebrate.
Right.
That's great, but that's not what this is.
Yeah. I want to change gears here for a second. I want to talk about former Vice President Mike Pence today speaking at the Faith and Freedom Coalition Summit and met by a pretty tough crowd. Let's take a listen to this.
Deeply humbled by them. Ralph Reed knows me well enough to know the introduction I prefer is a little bit shorter. I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order.
That didn't sound very good. What's your reaction to that? A lot of people screaming traitor at Mike Pence.
Well, I think that we have far too many people that are going across the nation right now and trying to intimidate others with their actions instead of having a civil discourse.
Yeah.
We have to be able to have debate, discussion, and be able to do it in a civil manner. And if we can't accomplish that, then we will continue to see this big divide in our nation. And myself, I prefer to bring true policies forward instead of trying to work on publicity and politics. And I do believe that this piece of legislation is just that. It's, as you clearly described, that this is about politics, it's about the critical race theory, and it's about continuing to try to drive a wedge between different groups across our nation, and it's unfortunate.
Understood. Congressman Matt Rosendale, the state of Montana. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me on, Rob.
All right, have a good weekend.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.